Okay, well, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this, the first of our new series of seminars on the legacy of Bonhoeffer for today. We will begin with a discussion of artificial intelligence through the lens of Bonhoeffer's ethics. But before I introduce you to our two speakers, there are a couple of housekeeping things that I probably ought to get out of the way at the beginning. The first is that we're confident that there will be a period for a question and answer and discussion at the end of the session. And if you would like to ask a question or raise a point, could you either indicate that in the chat and I'll come to you, or if you would like to post in the chat the question or you'd like to ask or the point you'd like to raise, then I will do that. The other is to clarify the position regarding recording. On this occasion, we are going to record Joseph's presentation, but then stop the recording. So the response and the Q&A will not be recorded on this particular occasion. So it's a very great pleasure to welcome our two speakers. Our presenter is Revd Joseph Nelson, who is a senior pastor at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Leeds and the Lutheran chaplain to the universities in Leeds, and also the assistant to the Lutheran bishop in the UK, Bishop Helvetia Troutman. His presentation, he draws on a thesis that he wrote on this topic, and we're delighted that the discussant is the external examiner of that thesis, Professor Esther Reed from the Department of Theology and Religion at the University of Exeter. She's a world-renowned scholar on Bonhoeffer and Christian ethics, and her most recent book was The Limits of Responsibility, the work of Bonhoeffer, engaging Bonhoeffer, in a globalizing era. And it was a great pleasure to welcome Esther as well to act as discussant. But without further ado, again, it's a very warm welcome to Joseph.
So it's wonderful to be able to speak to you today, particularly as a Lutheran pastor, to speak about Bonhoeffer on Reformation Day, on the anniversary of the beginning of the Reformation. So, whenever we start to consider ethics, most teachers will place before you the trolley problem. I know that my first ethics lecturer did. Imagine that you are the driver of a runaway tram, which you can only steer from one narrow track onto another. 5 men are working on one track and 1 man on the other. Anyone on the track he enters is bound to be killed. What is the most moral thing to do? Or, as our image says, nobody is in danger. You're a professor for moral philosophy. Do you tie people to the rails to save your job? There are, of course, many variations that can be added to make this scenario more difficult, such as you imagine one side is all children, and on the other side you have an old man. Does that impact the decision? Or one of the 5 might be a serial killer. Does that impact the decision? I work a little bit at Leeds Trinity University, along with my other jobs, lecturing occasionally and doing some things in the library. And there was even a game, the trolley problem game, available there, where it would give you different scenarios to make decisions. Now imagine that you're part of a team developing an artificial intelligence machine. During the training process, you have to help the machine learn to make the correct moral decisions when facing situations or decisions. What do you train the machine to do in this situation? Ethics cannot be ignored in technological development and implementation, and this is more true than ever when it comes to artificial intelligence. As we begin, I'm not actually going to start with Bonhoeffer. I want to give an introduction to AI because it can sometimes be misleading and people misunderstand it. And so I'll do a brief introduction to AI, a little bit on what the church has already done in responding to AI, and then move on to Bonhoeffer. Now, Professor John McCarthy was one of the founders of the discipline of artificial intelligence, and one of the people responsible for coming up with that term. In his article explaining the nature of AI, he defines AI as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. It is related to the similar task of using computers to understand human intelligence. But AI does not have to confine itself to methods that are biologically observable. When we talk about AI in use today, we are not talking about some super intelligence which can operate completely independently of fixed parameters. Normally, we are speaking of a computer system which does not simply do what the designer tells it to do, but learns for itself. AI, for now at least, is not the sci-fi megavillain that we can often imagine it to be. AI that is in use today is limited by its design, training, and input for which it has been programmed by human persons. In other words, it works within set parameters. For example, a chess AI that could potentially beat grandmasters could not answer a question like an Alexa could, which is an AI. And vice versa, Alexa probably wouldn't do very well at chess because they are programmed for different things. With a normal computer system, it's quite straightforward. Whenever A is the input, B is the output. With AI, it is far more complicated. If the start point is A, the machine would look through the available data, say B to Z, and use the information that it has access to, and therefore produce an answer. During the development of the machine, it would also be trained using training data to select the correct answer or the desired answer from the data that it has available until it starts to get it right. This process is repeated as the machine is trained by the developer to recognize patterns and come up with the answer on its own. In some ways, it's like trying to train a child to do a task. It takes time, repetition, and safe practice areas. Please note that what I'm going to talk about here in this bit is only a very brief introduction to AI. It is extremely complicated, and this is only a slight overview. It's important for us to consider what AI is currently used in. AI is used in just about every sphere of modern life. It's not something that we're discussing as a future prospect, it is a present reality. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but is offered to explore the key areas in which AI is used, so that we can identify common ethical issues that need to be considered in the development of a responsible ethic of artificial intelligence. This is particularly important when we consider that AI is now influencing what we buy, who we hire, who our friends are, what news feeds we receive, and even how children and the elderly are cared for. Likewise, when we consider that the areas in which AI is currently used, it becomes clear how important a functioning and responsible ethical approach is to the development and implementation of this new technology. When we consider the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare, the most obvious thing that will come to mind, for instance, is the concept of a virtual doctor, which already is starting to become a reality. Or it can be used in helping to diagnose certain conditions. But AI can do a huge variety of things, such as sorting out the correct medical records, data is safe, spotting patterns across vast data sets. AI is used in agriculture and farming. It's not something we'd normally think about. Yet one of my favorite little things was something called robo-bees that I discovered in my master's, where these little robot AIs go and pollinate in areas where there has been a decrease in bee or activity. It has the potential to assist in our efforts to reduce and even eliminate hunger and starvation. Things like the best crop rotations, or what minerals should be added to soil. They are used to monitor crop moisture, soil composition, and temperature in growing areas. At the same time, while AI can be used to mitigate the consequences of global warming on agriculture, it is also true, and we have to really be careful with this, that AI development has the potential to cause even further climate damage. For example, due to the large amounts of data that AI needs to process and train a single AI, releases 5 times the emission of an average car during its entire life cycle. Even in education, AI is being used. I know at the university where I've been working in the library, we used to use AI to link our digital resources to the correct images and make sure that links stayed active for students. And anyone who works in education will be acutely aware of the current challenges presented by ChatGPT. One more example from what could be a very long list. It's the most common one that people find disturbing. Have you ever had a conversation with a friend about watching a TV show or how you need to buy, say, a new kettle? You don't search for anything or discuss it online, and all of a sudden you have an advert for that exact product that you have been discussing. This is usually the result of an AI tool. People are very predictable. When you agree to cookies on a website, you're allowing them to track what you see and what you do. This leads to software being able to sell to you and advertise to you more effectively, because what you look for will be similar to what other people are looking for by monitoring the trends. Data is key to AI, and it's the area where ethics of AI needs to look the hardest. Even though that's not the theme of this, it's a very important thing to keep in mind. The current challenges presented by AI are vast. These are just a few that I want to highlight. So black boxes are key to AI development. Essentially, we know what we're putting into the machine and we know what we're getting out. But we're not entirely sure how that is done in the middle, because they use an AI to create different elements of the black box. A lack of transparency and explicability can lead to users rejecting the use of AI, or worse, the use of unexplainable models and black boxes poses a risk of obfuscating the discovery of algorithmic biases arising from flawed generated processes. There has been lately an increased trend in healthcare and criminal justice to leverage machine learning for high-stakes prediction applications, and this really deeply impacts human lives. There is a push for these models to be more explainable. Part of the issue with all of this can be biases. For example, there was a AI, I believe it was by Amazon, where they found out that the machine that they'd set up to go through job applicants would reject automatically anyone that was a woman or a person of colour because it deemed them unsuitable for manual work or untrustworthy. This was because the biases of the people who create it seep through. Even unconscious biases can have an impact upon the machine. And also the data that's used. For example, if you use data from the internet, you get everything, including things that potentially are not useful for the machine to be using. Black boxes are extremely complex. However, the long and short of them is that we don't exactly know what's going on inside. Some scholars argue that there is no difference between using a black box model and a more transparent model. However, others argue that there is a need to trade transparency for accuracy. This is certainly an area that is very complicated and needs to be considered. Another area that must be considered is the question of data and privacy. Data is the fuel of artificial intelligence. It is how AI is developed, it's how AI is trained. It is so essential when developing AI to get your data sets right, or else real issues can ensue. Data is also the place where our biases, both unconscious and conscious, can impact the machine in terms that potentially lead to discrimination. Far too often we prefer to focus on the big issues when it comes to something like new technology and forget these little ones. One area that is really obvious and that people are worried about is jobs and employment. People do fear being replaced by machines, and it is something that has already begun to happen in a lot of industries and sectors. In previous revolutions of work, such as the Industrial Revolution, developments required the downskilling of workers. For example, people went from working crafts to working in factories. However, this technological development will require the upskilling of the workforce, as even GPs and teachers could, at least in part, potentially in the future, be replaced by AI machines. And I even read one article that discussed the future of clergy as being machines, although I feel like that is less possible. Now, when I started my master's, it was abundantly clear that yes, we will lose fast food workers, which we were already seeing, or people working in checkouts, but we wouldn't lose highly skilled professionals. However, if you have seen what ChatGPT can now achieve, that's beginning to change. Some argue that AI will not lead to mass unemployment, as people will adapt, and those in charge will not simply use AI for profit. And yet, current trends seem to suggest that people will just use it for profit. Jobs and employment in many sectors face an existential threat from AI. Even dead actors now have their likenesses used in films, which have used AI machines to create this illusion. One area I remember early in my master's, it said, there'll be more time for people to engage in the arts because an AI machine cannot develop art or music. And it can't develop new art or music. But what we have seen since I started my master's, so that's only in the last few years, we've gone from a place of saying it would be impossible for AI to do this to a point where now you can get AI generated art, you can get AI generated music. It's all a very tricky subject, and there's no clear-cut, easy answer to any of these questions surrounding work. And yet for Bonhoeffer, the dignity of work is key to human flourishing. Work was a feature of our existence even before the fall. Work is not a result of human sin. It is the aim of our technological development, if it is the aim of our technological development to live a life of luxury without any form of work, this is not responsible living, because it does not fulfill our call or vocation. One of the greatest risks in our modern capitalist society is that we seek to maximize profit over the common good. However, without giving work dignity in and of itself, we lose something of what it means to be a human person. Technological development is essential, and this too is part of what it means to be human, to be creative and to develop. Yet a responsible government or organization or individual must pay careful attention to how AI is being implemented and consider how to avoid the risk of mass unemployment or the overuse of AI. We must consider, does using AI harm the dignity of people? What is the purpose of an AI design? If the design is to benefit humanity and to work for the common good, then it could be worth considering. If it is simply about profit margins, is that ethical or responsible? As I've mentioned briefly, the most overlooked challenge that we are presented with is the climate and the environment. AI can be a great tool in helping to combat climate change and other ecological issues. Yet at the same time, we know that training a single AI system can emit over 250,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. In fact, the use of AI technology across all sectors produces carbon dioxide emissions at a level comparable to the aviation industry. When I first read that, I was astounded. What we often forget is that when we go online, that data has to go somewhere. Often they are stored in big warehouses that use a huge amount of electricity to cool. They're often also placed in very cold climates to make the cooling more simple, but also can have huge ecological damage. Digital appliances can seem like a clean alternative, yet as with many things, this is far from straightforward. This is especially true when it comes to big data, which has a heavy footprint featuring high consumption of non-renewable energy. Big data can be very useful in combating environmental damage and impact. However, we are also responsible for the impact of our consumption upon the environment. And we have an obligation to look for cleaner and more sustainable modes of data storage and management, for the sake of others, for the sake of the present, and for the sake of the future. Responsible AI must deal with the impact of AI on the environment and take into consideration in development and implementation. We cannot ignore our responsibility to the environment, as responsibility to the environment is a key human vocation. An AI machine might be profitable and efficient, but if it is going to do harm to the environment, then this cannot be ignored when we are seeking to be responsible agents. Now, when I first started looking at AI, someone said to me, "What, like the Terminator?" Many of you might expect me to start to talk about the destruction of the human race, to compare AI to movies that we've all seen, such as iRobot. However, as much as this is very tempting, and it's a temptation that a lot of ethicists have gone towards, there is plenty of commentary on that already. And it is very important and relevant that we look at things like, are we using AI as a form of God? Or as one scholar put it, we are made in the image of God. Are we making something in the image of us? And how dangerous could that be? However, far too little commentary is focused on the current state of AI, and in some ways I would argue that it is far more pressing ethical issue than focusing on apocalyptic possibilities. We are called as Christians to deal with things here and now, to recognize the reality in which we live, and to seek the building of the kingdom of God. Or as Bonhoeffer would put it, we must deal with the real. We must deal with what is in front of us, not deal solely in possible futures. One way in which Christians have responded to AI is the Rome Call to AI Ethics. It's a very substantial document that brings together governmental, religious, educational, and technological organizations to agree on a set of principles related to AI. The most recent signatory to the call is the Anglican Communion, and it was signed by the Archbishop Justin Welby, who signed it in April this year. It has also been endorsed by the Jewish and Islamic organizations. It's not yet been endorsed by the Lutheran World Federation, but hopefully it will be soon. Microsoft and IBM were two of the first to sign, although with the development of ChatGPT, a number of other organizations have overtaken groups like Microsoft and IBM, groups with less of a emphasis on ethics have been able to move faster. And I am very concerned about what it means for those organizations who are not involved who are not at the moment putting in the ethics work in these areas. The Rome Call came with these 6 principles for responsibility in AI: transparency, inclusion, responsibility, impartiality, reliability, security, and privacy. The issue with any of these sort of principles, however, is these are great in theory, but how do they work in practice? And that is an ongoing discussion. But it is a good place to start with these principles. Dietrich Bonhoeffer doesn't say all that much about technology. He certainly does not comment on artificial intelligence, even though the sort of godfathers of artificial intelligence were alive at the same time, especially with Turing and a lot of his work on computing. In his chapter Heritage and Decay of Ethics, Bonhoeffer does discuss technology briefly. Under the context of secularization and the French Revolution, Bonhoeffer speaks of the current cult of radio. He's not completely negative about radio or technology in general, but he recognizes that as much as there are many benefits, there are also great risks with any such technology. Bonhoeffer is keen to note and warn that it is easy for technology to become an end in itself. He argues that there is a risk that we seek in technology ways to become like a god who thinks that they know better than nature and who attempts to subjugate nature and destroy it. Bonhoeffer argues that it is easy for technology to be used as a tool of nationalism and to lead to destruction and oppression. Bonhoeffer recognizes that technology can create an atmosphere of truthfulness, light, and clarity, with an increase in intellectual honesty in all things. especially in a society with greater religious and political freedom. Yet he also warns against a rise of technology which can lead to the violation and exploitation of those who are weaker. On the one hand, according to Bonhoeffer, it can be a symptom of a naive faith to protest against technology as being a challenge to God. Yet he also argues that through advances in technology, we came ever more to the realization of the rights of every human person, along with a sense of the common solidarity between all persons. I think on Reformation Day of the importance of the printing press, how technological developments can be so important to humanity. So Bonhoeffer is very positive towards technology in some ways, that through technology we have a greater chance at freedom and rights. However, there is another side to his context. He also states that the masses and nationalism are the enemies of reason. Technology and the masses are anti-nationalistic. Nationalism and technology are the enemies of the masses. Bonhoeffer recognizes what we saw with the Arab Spring. Technology and the masses can overthrow nationalism. But also what we see with the Nazis, where nationalism and technology can be the enemy of the people. Bonhoeffer warns against the ways in which technology can be used as a tool of suppression and control, as he saw during his lifetime. Likewise, there is a risk that the master of the machine becomes its slave. The machine becomes an enemy of the human being. The creation rebels against its creator, just as humanity rebels against God and destroys nature. In some ways, technology could lead to a second fall. This argument is echoed and proven true with the use of atomic weapons not long after Bonhoeffer's death. It is important to remember that Bonhoeffer is witnessing firsthand the use of technology, radio, and cinema as a tool of propaganda for the Nazi regime. Bonhoeffer recognizes this danger and the influence that technology can have over people's lives. Just think about the ways phones, computers, online shopping, and social media have taken over and dominated our lives in the last few years. They are good things, but they do possess a strong influence over us. As we see, technology does have a clear and present influence on our lives. Bonhoeffer's main concern on this front is the fact that we do not lose our humanity amongst the challenges of this technology. He recognizes the risk posed by technology to the state and social order, but likewise the risk to the freedom of the individual that technology can present. It is important to state that science does not do science. Scientists and society do it. Both Bonhoeffer was deeply aware of the need for people to take on responsibility for the state of science and religion during the Second World War. He was equally aware of the importance of stressing the place of ethics in technological research. Along with his dialogue on the real, he recognizes that far too often, religion becomes a separated sector of life, a sector of the unknown and the inexplicable. Yet Bonhoeffer sees religion as often being people's last resort in life, when in reality religion should be leading us to always regard ourselves as irrevocably accountable and responsible. Our growth in technology and science, rather than being a disastrous intrusion on the territory of the divine, should instead be viewed as a place where we have the opportunity to act as free and responsible agents in the here and now, dealing ethically with the real. Too often we are tempted to remove ethics from science and technological development, or leave it as a subsection. We should instead follow the example of Bonhoeffer and ensure that ethics is weaved into the fabric of everything that we do. As Bonhoeffer argues, we should do fabric of everything that we do. In our search for responsibility in artificial intelligence, we are to seek to become a people who recognize that technological communicators facing the need for innovation, also need an ethical education, which helps them to recognize ethical risks and how to discern them independently, so that they can become responsible agents and recognize their role in seeking the common good. It is easy to justify things when working solely using principles. When one uses a concept that one is truly personally responsible for the consequences of their actions, ethics becomes more than words or tick boxes, and instead becomes a way of life. This is ultimately what Bonhoeffer's ethics of responsibility in technology is calling us to, a way of life rather than a concept or idea or tick box. Bonhoeffer, in his conceptions of technology and responsibility, calls us back to the real and to personal relationship and responsibility for one another. Ultimately, Bonhoeffer calls us to be responsible agents in the world. It is not good enough to idly sit by when oppression and injustice takes place. It is not good enough to leave standing up for the weak and powerless to someone else. It is not good enough to allow, as Bonhoeffer would put it, our following of Jesus Christ to become a Sunday obligation if it is not something that we live in our lives. We are part of a global network. You and I have a share in the rewards and consequences that result in it. Just as with climate change, AI is something that affects each and every one of us and should be regarded as something with which we must be careful. I am responsible for the products that I consume and the systems that produce them. I am responsible for the consequences of those actions. Just as with climate change, it is easy to bury my head in the sand when it comes to questions of AI and feel like there is nothing that you or I can do about it. However, there are some questions that you could ask. When using digital media, am I being responsible? Do I know enough about how this website or company are using my data? Am I consuming content from a source that is using AI responsibly? Does the product that I'm using, or the company that produces it, or the institution for which I work, commit to a policy of responsibility of AI? Or have they signed something like the Rome Call? It is important to stay informed to the best of your ability. Try to understand what is going on with AI and how it is being used. But also that we live in a democracy, and we are fortunate to have a voice. It is important on issues such as this to know when and how to use and to push for legislation. Above all, for Christians, Bonhoeffer states that we are called to representative action. We are called to go beyond the requirements of law and to become our brother's keeper. We are to act as if we are responsible for one another and for one another for the sake of Jesus Christ, even when we're not, because of our common Creator in God the Father, our common brother in Jesus Christ. It is not acceptable for us to act as if the only person that we are morally responsible for is ourselves. Christians in particular are called to take on the issues of the world, just as Jesus did. We are social creatures, and we need to act in a way that recognizes that we are called to the preferential option for the other, and to engage with the world. Now, for Bonhoeffer, there is one key final part to any ethics of responsibility. What we have heard will hopefully encourage you towards responsibility in your engagement with issues of technology. However, I also recognize that this topic can fill us with dread and despair. Yet for Bonhoeffer, our hope as disciples must always be on Jesus Christ, but to never seek cheap grace. Cheap grace in such an instance would be to bury our head in the sand. Cheap grace would be to ignore what's going on in the world around us. Yet costly grace, as Bonhoeffer would put it, the grace of Jesus Christ, demands that we do not simply bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice, but that we drive a spoke into the wheel itself. And where such technology causes harm to our neighbor, we stand up for justice. Costly grace demands that we take up responsibility and serve the common good. while at all times never looking to ourselves and our works, never looking to the problem in front of us, but always keeping our eyes on our hope, on Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Joseph. Thank you very much.